Chapter 3. Eating Bitterness. In spring seeds are sown, and for each grain planted, many are harvested. No land is left uncultivated. Yet still do many peasants die of hunger, working with their hoes under the hottest sun. Their sweat drips down and mingles with the earth. Who will understand that the food we eat has been paid for with such bitter toil? Li Shen. The gentry of Longbow, the landlords, the rich peasants, the clan elders, the overseers of temple property, and the managers of religious societies would not have been considered well off in any Western land. Their lives were luxurious only in contrast to the absolute poverty and near starvation of the great mass of the people. They did not live in palaces. They enjoyed none of the conveniences of modern life. In most cases, the only difference between their homes and those of the rest of the population was in the construction materials used. The prosperous built with brick, the poor with adobe. Both materials came from the earth underfoot, and the interior plan and conveniences of a brick home differed little from those of a house built of adobe. What made the lives of the gentry so enviable to the working peasants was the security they enjoyed from hunger and cold. They at least had a roof over their heads. They had warm clothes to wear. They had some silk finery for feast days, wedding celebrations, and funerals. They had quilts to sleep under. They even had fuel for their stoves and for their kangs. Footnote. A kang is a raised platform made of mud bricks that usually takes up one whole side of a room in a Chinese house. It is so constructed that the flue from the cooking fire runs under it and warms it. In the winter, the women live and work on the kang during the day. The whole family sleeps on it at night. When the kang is in a room where no cooking is done, a fire for the purpose of warming the kang can be built under it. They had a little variety in their diet. They could eat wheat often and even meat once in a while. The true landlords among them did no manual labor, either in the field or in the home. Hired laborers or tenants tilled the fields. Servant girls and domestic slaves cooked the meals, sewed, washed, and swept up. Footnote. Poor peasant children, especially girls, were bought and raised as slaves. At 13 to 15 years of age, they were sold as brides. Young girls were also hired as servants. The menfolk of these families busied themselves with managerial affairs, money lending, and religious and clan functions. They amused themselves with women, opium smoking, and gambling. The education was another great advantage which the gentry enjoyed. They often hired special tutors to live in the home and had set up a village school for their progeny. When their young people grew older, they were sent on to middle school or high school at the county seat, and even to college in Taiwan or Beijing. As college graduates, they had a chance to move into the higher bureaucracy, the officer corps of the army, or one of the larger commercial or banking establishments in the provincial capital. This world of security, relative comfort, influence, position, and leisure was maintained amidst a sea of the most dismal and frightening poverty and hunger. A poverty and hunger which at all times threatened to engulf any family which relaxed its vigilance, took pity on its poor neighbors, failed to extract the last copper of rent and interest, or ceased for an instant the incessant accumulation of grain and money. Those who did not go up went down, and those who went down often went to their deaths, or at least to the dissolution and dispersal of their families. The extremes to which never-ending vigilance had to be carried was demonstrated most clearly when the crops began to ripen. Then every family, whether landlord, middle peasant, or tenant, had to maintain guards in the fields day and night. Toothless old grandmothers and children in split pants, hardly big enough to carry a stick, stood eternal watch against thieves. To protect these pitiful sentries from the sun at noon and the dew before dawn, little shelters of kaleong stalks or mud bricks mushroomed suddenly on every plot and strip. For weeks at a time, almost half the population of every community lodged overnight in the fields, each family keeping an eye on all the rest. Thus, both prosperous and poor peasants were forced to expend their often exhausted energies on a guard duty that was sheer waste from the point of view of society, but that meant the difference between life and death to every cropper. Any strip left unwatched was almost sure to be looted by some half-starved family trying to stay alive just a few more days until its own poor crops matured. To have no crops at all was the worst fate that any peasant could imagine. Yet 6% of the population was in exactly such straits. Here is the story told to me by Shen Faliang, the boy indentured to Sheng Qing Ho for 7 years in order to pay off his father's $4 debt. When I first went to work for Sheng Qing Ho, I was only 14. All the same, I had to do chores around the house. I was too small to carry full buckets, but I had to carry water from the well. I filled the buckets half full and brought them in that way. All the years I worked for Qing Ho, I never had a full stomach. I was hungry all the time. Every day he ate solid enough food, but he gave me only a little soup with millet in it. You could count the grains that were floating around in the water. Twice I got sick, worn out with work, and I was always cold. I never had food or clothes enough to keep warm. When I got sick, I couldn't work. Then the landlord was very angry. He got 2 men to carry me home so that he wouldn't have to feed me while I was sick, and he made my father pay for the laborer that took my place. My sickness cost him nothing. My own family had to bear the entire burden. No matter how hard I worked, I couldn't begin to pay off that debt. By the time I had been there several years, we owed him $15 instead of $4. I told him, "It's no use working for you. No matter what I do, the debts get bigger. I want to leave." But he wouldn't let me. The contract said 7 years, and he held us to it. By that time, I had grown up. I could do a man's work. He finally promised to pay me $10 a year instead of $8. I said I wouldn't ask for more money, and he said he wouldn't jump the interest on the debt. But even so, it was no use. Whenever I broke anything, he made me pay a high price for it. Once there was a long drought. The soil was very hard. He pushed us to finish the hoeing quickly. In my hurry, I cracked the handle of the hoe. When he saw it, he was very angry. He knocked several dollars off my year's wages, enough to buy 2 new handles, even though that one could still be used. In fact, I did use the hoe for a long time after that. At the end of the year, I didn't get enough wages to buy a pair of pants. Any small mistake, and he blew up. I had to carry water through the gate. There was a threshold there and a sharp turn. If I spilled some water on the ground, he cursed me for messing up the courtyard. Once I tore the horse's collar. He cursed me and my ancestors. I didn't dare answer back. I think that was worse than the food and the filthy quarters, not being able to talk back. In those days, the landlord's word was law. They had their way. When it was really hot, and they said it was not, we dared not say it was hot. When it really was cold, and they said it wasn't, we dared not say it was cold. Whatever happened, we had to listen to them. You could never finish telling of the abuse the landlords gave us. At the end of each year, Qing Ho subtracted all the things he claimed I broke. The time I was sick, and such things. What was left was never enough to pay off the interest on the money, so he kept everything. I got no wage at all. When the 7 years were up, I had to tear down 2 sections of my house, sell the wood and the bricks, and only then was I able to pay Qing Ho off. Then I went to work for Wang Lai Sun. I took it for granted that perhaps some other family treated people better, but I soon found out that all the crows in the world are black. Lai Sun's household was no better. In the famine year, I had to sell the rest of my house to live at all. I sold it to Sheng Qing Ho, but the money came too late to save my wife. She was so sick with hunger that she died a few days later. The money did no good at all. I used some of it to bury her. We bought millet with the rest of it. But the millet wasn't enough to live on, and we had to go out in the hills to dig herbs, wild herbs. Before the year was up, all we had left to eat was herbs and weeds and the leaves off the trees. Even so, the worst days of my life were when I was a child. I often had nothing to eat. In the winter, I had no padded clothes to wear. One suit of padded clothes had to last for many years. It was patched over and over again. It wore so thin that it was no better than a summer jacket. How then could I pass the winter? I can't imagine how we got through. I can't even remember. When we didn't have any millet, we drank hot water. If we had any money, we bought coal, but most of the time we had none. What was the happiest day of my life? I haven't passed any happy days. But if you want to compare, the days since liberation have been good. Another story that demonstrates with painful clarity what had to be endured by families of landless peasants is that of Wang Chunglai's wife. Wang Chunglai was the brother by adoption of Wang Laisun, the second largest landholder in Longbo. Laisun inherited the Wang family land and wealth, but never prospered because he was a hopeless drug addict. In fact, neither he nor his brother, Chunglai, were true sons of Old Man Wang. Both were bought as children by the landlord and raised in his home as sons because he had no progeny. When the old man died, his shrewd wife did not fancy dividing the property between two heirs, neither of whom had a legitimate claim. One son was enough to carry out the duties of ancestor worship and produce a new generation. She therefore treated one boy, Lai Sun, as a son, and the other, Chung Lai, as a servant and hired laborer. To ensure help in the house, the old lady bought Chung Lai a wife. The girl was 9 years old at the time, cost the family 9 strings of cash, and lived in the home as a servant for 6 years before she was actually wed to Chung Lai. Footnote: a string of cash was made up of copper coins, each with a hole in the center so that it could be strung on a string. There were 100 coins to a string. 9 strings could buy 1 silver dollar. Being a child wife, I was often beaten and cursed by everyone in the family, she said when telling her life story years later. At the beginning, since I was only 9, I took care of some sheep and pigs. Every day I went out on the hill to watch the sheep, and when I came back, I fed the pigs. At that time, Lai Shun's first wife was alive, and she cooked for the family. The first wife was not so bad, and besides, I was out all day. Still, I was beaten by the old lady. It was for no reason except that she thought I didn't work hard. I was married at 15. After that, it was worse, much worse. That was because Lai Shun married again, and the second wife was most terrible. She never beat me herself. She just complained to the old lady and let her beat me. I was beaten too many times to remember. I was beaten almost every day, so it's hard to remember anything special about it. They ate mian, noodles. I cooked for them, but I was not allowed to eat even the leftover noodles. Chung Lai and I ate millet, broth made of screenings, and ground corn. At that time, I thought to myself, because I have no parents and these people are so terrible, there is no way out for me. I often wandered beside the well, but no one wants to jump into the well, so finally I thought it was better to lead a beggar's life than to kill oneself by one's own hand. So my hope was to go out and work for others. One day, the mother-in-law broke my arm. The water in the pot was boiling. I asked her what I should cook and how much millet was in the pot. She did not answer. So I asked her again. Then she got angry and beat me. She said I annoyed her and was too stupid. That was the way it usually was. But that time, she took up an iron poker and broke my arm with it. My arm hurt, so I lay on the kong for a fortnight and couldn't work or even move. Then Lai Sun took a knife and threatened us. He said that unless we left, he would kill us both. I wanted to go away and find work somewhere else, but Chung Lai was afraid. He feared death from hunger, for once we left the family, we would never get a thing. But in the end, we were driven out anyway. They drove us out barehanded. Chung Lai went to Taiyuan to pull a rickshaw. He sent back money when he could. I myself cooked for a landlord in Fusun. Life there was better than at home. Anyway, I got enough to eat, and when I asked them what to cook, they answered me. Sometimes they even gave me old clothes or rags to wear, and I earned about $1 a month. After 6 years, we saved enough to buy an acre of land. Then came the famine year. Chung Lai had to come home from Taiyuan, but he was sick. From the land, we got 2 bags of grain. After paying the tax, there was nothing left. Hunger made Chung Lai sicker. By that time, I had 2 children, a boy and a girl. We 3 went out to beg. Sometimes we had to go very far away and couldn't get back at night. So often we slept in temples, and often we couldn't find a temple to stay in and had to sleep outdoors. Once I asked the children, "Are you frightened?" They said, "We are not afraid as long as we can find something to eat." But because it was a famine year, it was very hard to find food. We had to sell the land. We got 6 bushels of millet and lived a whole year on it. We added whatever we could find to go with it. But it was hard to find anything. There weren't even any leaves left on the trees. We went back to Longbo to beg from Wang Laixun. His whole family still ate well. We knelt down before them and begged for something to eat. We asked pity for the children. "We do not ask things from you. We know there is no hope for us, but we wish you could have some pity on the children, for they are your own grandson and granddaughter." But they took sticks and beat the children. We stayed there past noon, but could not even get a bowl of water from them. So we took the children to other villages and got something. Strangers treated us better than our own relatives. After the famine year, there was a good summer harvest, but then we had no land. Chung Lai went to work as a hired laborer, and I cooked out for others as before. We had to leave the children at home alone. Every few days I returned home and gave them a little millet or corn. They themselves went out to beg. At the end of the year, I saw that every family had prepared noodles and other good things to eat. I asked the mistress to give me a little corn to take to the children so that they too could pass the new year, but she only cursed and drove me out. So I had no job and returned home with a little corn flour that I bought with my wages. When the children saw me, they wept. We 3 wept the whole day. My children said to me, "We will beg together and die together rather than live apart." So we went out to beg again. After the summer harvest, we all went out to glean wheat in the fields. One day I looked up. There was a wolf. He just stood and stared at me. I was frightened. I dared not move. I stared right back at him. My daughter saw the wolf and ran, but the wolf chased her and caught her. I couldn't move. I only stood there and watched the wolf open his great mouth and bite my daughter. My son cried, "See how big the mouth is and the terrible red tongue." At this moment, a cart passed on the road. The men in the cart jumped out and began to beat the wolf. Still, I stood frozen to the spot. The men drove the wolf away. They called me. My daughter was still alive. When I went up to her, I saw that the wolf had bitten a big piece of flesh from her leg and slashed her cheeks, but her eyes were clear and stared at me. I clasped her to my breast and tried to carry her home, but after a little while she died. Still, I held her dead body. Then I fainted, and the carters put me in the cart with the boy. They left her little body in the field and carried me home. When I recovered consciousness, I was in a stupor. Every day I just sat behind closed doors and said, "The wolf is coming! The wolf is coming!" The neighbors pitied me and sent a little food. These life stories reflect but a small fraction of the chronic social tragedy that permeated the community and the society at large. The extreme hardship borne by Xin Fa Liang and Wang Chunglai and his wife did not surpass in degree the sufferings endured by many other poor peasants in Longbo, in the neighboring villages, and in thousands of similar villages scattered throughout China. The following are only a few incidents culled at random from the life stories of peasants with whom I talked. There were 3 famine years in a row. The whole family went out to beg things to eat. In Xinchang City, conditions were very bad. Many mothers threw newborn children into the river. Many children wandered about on the streets and couldn't find their parents. We had to sell our eldest daughter. She was then already 14. Better to move than to die, we thought. We sold what few things we had. We took our patched quilt on a carrying pole and set out for Changchi, with the little boy in the basket on the other end. He cried all the way from hunger. We rested before a gate. Because the boy wept so bitterly, a woman came out. We stayed there 3 days. On the fourth morning, the woman said she wanted to buy the boy. We put him on the kung. He fell asleep. In the next room, we were paid $5 silver. Then they drove us out. They were afraid when the boy woke up, he would cry for his mother. My heart was so bitter. To sell one's own child was such a painful thing. We wept all day on the road. I almost starved to death. One day I lay on the street. A cart came along. The driver yelled at me to move. I was too weak. I didn't care if he drove over me or not. He finally had to drive around me. During the famine, we ate leaves and the remnants from vinegar making. We were so weak and hungry we couldn't walk. I went out to the hills to get leaves, and there the people were fighting each other over the leaves on the trees. My little sister starved to death. My brother's wife couldn't bear the hunger and ran away and never came back. My cousin was forced to become a landlord's concubine. I and the children worked for others thinning millet. We got only half a quart of grain. For each meal, we cooked only a fistful with some weeds in it. The children's stomachs were swollen, and every bone in their bodies stuck through their skin. After a while, the little boy couldn't get up. He just lay on the kang, sick with dysentery and many, many worms. A whole basin full of worms crawled out from his behind. Even after he was dead, the worms kept coming out. The little girl had no milk from me, for I had nothing to eat myself. So, of course, she died. People could not speak of the past without weeping, nor could one listen to their stories dry-eyed. Yet, as the details piled up, horror on horror, one's senses became dulled. The barbarity, the cruelty, the terror of the old life was so overwhelming that in time it ceased to shock. One began to take for granted that worms crawled from dying children, that women and children were bought and sold like cattle, that people were beaten to death, that they fought each other for the leaves on the trees. The impossible took on the aura of the commonplace. The most terrible thing about the conditions of life in Longbow in those days was not any single aspect of the all but universal misery. It was that there was no hope of change. The fearful tragedy played and replayed itself without end. Insofar as things did change, they changed for the worse as the crisis of China's social system deepened. For the majority of the peasants who, like Xin Faliang and Chung Lai's wife, were caught in the downward drift, conditions became more and more intolerable as time went on. Footnote: there's even reason to believe that, with the increased pressure on the land caused by the growth of the population, the condition of the rural population in some parts of China may actually be worse than it was 2 centuries ago. R. H. Tawney, Land and Labor in China, page 71. Some of the decline can be attributed to the economic dislocations and social disorders generic to periods of dynastic decay. More important was the unprecedented intervention from abroad, which began around 1840. One immediate consequence of intervention was a whole series of wars, which sapped the country's reserves. These wars, defensive in nature as the Western powers invaded, became fratricidal as these same powers backed one warlord against another for spheres of influence, or their favorite of the moment against popular resistance. The trading and investment concessions accruing to the victors enabled foreigners to transfer substantial amounts of real wealth from the underdeveloped East to the advanced industrial West and Japan. This bleeding away of sorely needed capital was aggravated by the simultaneous destruction of capital formation in important handicraft industries. Large-scale importation of cheap machine-made goods undermined one sector of the economy after the other. This was especially true of the textile trades. Millions of weavers, unable to compete with the power-driven looms of Lancaster, Tokyo, and later Shanghai, lost their main means of livelihood and were thrown into the swelling stream of those bidding for the scarce and already depleted land. The rising tide of landless and destitute people enabled landowners to stiffen the terms of tenancy, to raise rents and jack up interest rates. It enabled grain dealers to force harvest time prices lower and winter and spring prices higher. It enabled merchants to widen the gap between farm produce and industrial products. Not only the laborers and tenants, but also the land-owning middle peasants felt the squeeze more and more. To maintain bare subsistence, they had to increase working hours, get up earlier, finish later, and work hard on the job. Even then, they could not make ends meet. They had to go over more frequently to the moneylender, and once saddled with debt, found it impossible to break free. It was an exceptional family in Longbow that did not owe the equivalent of several years' earnings. People said, the debts of the poor begin at birth. When a boy is a month old, the family wishes to celebrate, but they have to borrow money in order to make dumplings, and so, before the child can sit up, he's already in debt to the landlord. As he grows, the interest mounts until the burden is too great to bear. Weighed down by high interest rates, harassed by heavy taxes, caught in the snares of a rigged market, many landowning peasants went bankrupt, sold out their holdings strip by strip, and ended up with the yoke of rent around their necks, or left for the city, hoping to find some work in industry or transport that would keep them alive. Others became soldiers in the armies of the warlords, or joined local bandit gangs. There are districts in which the position of the rural population is that of a man standing permanently up to the neck in water, so that even a ripple is sufficient to drown him, wrote R. H. Tawney in 1932. Footnote. Ibid, page 77. See also Edgar Snow, Red Star over China, New York, Modern Library, 1944, page 83. The 5th District of Lucheng County was such a district, and Longbow such a place.